The December wind howled outside. But inside Vance Castle, only one sound echoed silence. Julian Vance, 45, sat alone in the massive dining room, a space big enough to host an upscale dinner party for 20 guests. The wheels of his expensive electric wheelchair glided across the marble floor. Its hum as soft as a breath, passing perfectly set but never occupied leather chairs. Julian maneuvered closer to the large window looking out at the world beyond. A world he once belonged to, but which had now become a foreign place, a silent movie playing out through the lens of a transparent pane of glass. He had everything: a 19th century castle, a bottomless bank account, a tech empire named Vance Tech. Everything except his legs. 15 years had passed since that fateful night. The night his Porsche flipped on a slick coastal road. The accident took the life of his best friend, Ethan Reed, and locked Julian in an immobile body. Julian recalled waking up in the hospital, the physical pain a mere whisper compared to the emotional agony. The pain of knowing he had survived, but Ethan had not. He had tried to save Ethan. He had reached out, but it was too late. The car flipped, and Ethan's last look had haunted him for 15 years. A haunting that had turned Julian from an ambitious young man into a cold, reclusive one. Every day Julian would search for his and Ethan's names online, rereading the old headlines. Tech billionaire Julian Vance miraculously survives, best friend dies. Vance Tech co-founder lives through tragic accident. Each line was a knife to his soul, a reminder of the guilt that had burrowed deep into his heart. He had used his money and power to silence the incident, to ensure no one mentioned his speeding that night. But that silence only made the echo of his guilt louder in his mind. After the accident, Julian's life fell apart. His wife Genevieve left him 3 years later, taking with her a coldness and greed. She couldn't bear his gloom and irrational anger. Or perhaps she simply didn't want to live with a disabled man. His friends also gradually disappeared, tired of his bitter remarks and despair. Even his mother, Diana Vance, a powerful and loving woman, visited less often. She couldn't stand seeing her son, once so full of life, now just a shadow of his former self. "Mr. Vance, dinner is served." The voice of Mrs. Haynes, the elderly housekeeper, broke the silence. Julian didn't answer, just gave a slight nod. He wheeled himself to the long dining table where a plate of lamb chops sat next to a glass of red wine. A lavish dinner for a lonely man. He took a sip of the expensive Italian wine, its bitter notes gliding over his tongue. But he could no longer taste anything. Numbness, that's all he felt. He pushed the plate of lamb chops away, barely touching it. He rolled toward his study, a massive room with towering bookshelves and portraits of his ancestors. Once again the cruel truth presented itself. All his ancestors, all the people in the paintings, could walk on their own 2 feet. Julian stopped in front of a portrait. The painting showed a laughing, vibrant boy. It was a portrait of himself at age 10. He had once been that boy, free, fearless. But now, he was just a cripple. Outside, a gentle snow began to fall. Julian looked out through the frosted window, seeing the blurred figures of people walking on the sidewalk. Ordinary people, people who could walk, people who took their legs for granted. A small but firm knock at the back door of the mansion pulled Julian from his thoughts. Who would come on such a cold night? Mrs. Haynes had left long ago. Julian wasn't expecting anyone. The knock repeated, soft yet persistent. He usually wanted to be alone, but curiosity won out. He pushed his wheelchair, passing the portraits, past the neatly arranged furniture for a man who would never stand again. The knocking had stopped, but he still opened the heavy wooden door. A cold gust of wind blew in, carrying snowflakes. He must have seen a small girl shivering at the door. a tiny girl no older than 6 with messy chestnut hair and worn-out threadbare clothes. Her thin jacket was no match for the December cold of Massachusetts. "Excuse me, mister," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so hungry. Do you have any food you're not going to eat?" Julian was stunned. In his 15 years of isolation, no one had ever knocked on his door for help. Everyone wanted something from him, money, influence, connections. But this little girl was just asking for scraps. "What are you doing here by yourself?" Julian asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I live with my mom in that old apartment across the street," she said, pointing to a dilapidated building. "Mom's working late again. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, said rich people often throw away good food." The girl's eyes were clear blue, devoid of any fear or judgment when she looked at his wheelchair. She saw him as a normal person, not a broken billionaire. "What's your name?" Julian suddenly asked. "My name is Clara Reed. What's yours?" "Robert Julian Vance," he replied. "But you can call me Julian." Clara smiled, and for the first time in years, Julian felt something stir in his chest, something he thought had long been dead. "I have a proposition for you, Mr. Julian," Clara said, stepping closer. "You give me the food you don't eat, and I'll give you something even better." Julian let out a laugh. The sound was strange and hollow in the night air. "What could you possibly give me, little girl?" Clara looked him straight in the eye, her small hand touching the armrest of his wheelchair. "I'll make you walk." Those words hit Julian like a punch. For a moment, the old anger flared. How dare a child mock him with such an impossible promise? He had heard such words too many times from doctors, researchers, healers. All of them promised miracles, took his money, and left him exactly where he started. But something in Clara's voice stopped him from slamming the door. There was no greed, no calculation, just an absolute certainty, as if she were simply stating that the sky is blue or snow is cold. Julian laughed harder, his laughter echoing in the dark night. "You think you can make me walk?" "I know I can," Clara said simply. "I already did." The next morning, Julian woke with Clara's words still echoing in his head. "I'll make you walk." He had given the girl a full box of food and watched her small figure disappear into the night. He had also asked her to come back the next day. Now, as Mrs. Haynes prepared a breakfast he knew he wouldn't touch, Julian felt a strange sensation, an excitement he thought had long since died. "Mr. Vance," Mrs. Haynes said carefully, "there's a little girl at the door who says she wants to see you." Julian's heart skipped a beat. "Let her in," he replied, his voice suddenly stronger. Clara appeared at the dining room door, still in her worn-out clothes, but her face was bright in the morning sun. In her hand was a small paper bag. "Good morning, Mr. Julian," Clara said cheerily. "I brought you this." "You brought me this?" Julian couldn't hide his surprise. In his experience, people always wanted to take something from him, never to give. Clara nodded, then pulled a crushed flower from the bag. It was clearly picked from some garden, a bit wilted, but she presented it to him as if it were made of gold. "My mom says that when someone is nice to you, you should be nice back. This is to thank you for dinner." Julian took the flower, his hands holding a gift for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "Thank you, Clara. That's very kind of you." "Can I see your legs?" Clara asked unexpectedly. The question would have angered Julian coming from anyone else. But from an innocent child like her, it was pure curiosity. "They don't work," Julian answered carefully. "I don't feel anything." "Can I touch them?" Julian hesitated. Even doctors touched his legs with scientific detachment. It had been 20 years since anyone had touched his legs, with warmth, with kindness. "I guess so." Clara stepped closer, gently placing her small hand on his knee, through the fabric of his trousers. The sensation was strangely warm and soft. And for a brief moment, Julian swore he felt something. Not a physical sensation, but a presence. "They're just asleep," Clara said with conviction. "Sometimes when things get too tired, they sleep for a long time. But they'll wake up." "Clara," Julian said gently, "my legs aren't asleep. They're broken. The doctors said they will never work again." "Doctors don't know everything," Clara replied with the confidence only a 6-year-old could have. "My mom says when I was little I couldn't talk for the first 3 years. The doctor said there was a problem with my brain. But then one day I started talking and now I talk all day long." She grinned and Julian found himself almost believing in her impossible optimism. "How exactly do you plan to make me walk?" he asked. Clara climbed onto the chair opposite him, her small legs swinging. "First, you have to want to walk for the right reason. You know." "What do you mean?" "Most people want something for themselves, but miracles don't work like that. You have to want to walk to help other people." "Miracles?" Julian almost laughed again, but something in Clara's serious eyes stopped him. "I've wanted to walk for 15 years, Julian said. "Trust me, I wanted enough." "But why?" Clara asked. "Why do you want to walk?" The question caught Julian off guard. Why did he want to walk? To be normal again. To get his old life back, to stop feeling broken. "I want to be the person I used to be," he finally answered. Clara shook her head. "That's wanting it for yourself. If you could walk but only to help other people, would you still want to?" Julian stared at the little philosopher across from him. When was the last time he had thought about what he could do for others? I don't know," he admitted. "That's okay," Clara said cheerfully. "We have time to figure it out. Can I come back tomorrow?" "Yes," Julian replied without hesitation. "Yes, please come back." Clara jumped off the chair and ran for the door. But then she turned back. "Oh, Mr. Julian, you should eat your breakfast. You're going to need your strength." And for the first time in months, Julian felt hungry. About 10 minutes after Julian said goodbye to Clara, a loud, insistent knock echoed from the door. It wasn't the knock of a 6-year-old girl, but of an impatient adult. Julian, still at the dining table, felt a strange urgency. Perhaps Clara's presence had awakened something in him. He wheeled his chair toward the door. When the door opened, he saw a young woman in her late 20s standing there, her face tight with worry and anger. She wore an old coat, her hair tied up, but with a few strands falling loose, and her bright blue eyes blazed with determination. Julian recognized those eyes instantly. They were identical to Clara's. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice strained. "I'm Eleanor Reed, Clara's mother. I heard she came here and asked you for food." Julian sensed the protectiveness and fear in her voice. He had met many mothers like her, women ready to fight to protect their children. But he had never seen a woman as resilient as Eleanor. "Yes, Ms. Reed. She did, and I gave her dinner." "What did you do to her?" Eleanor asked, her hands clenched into fists. "She said you let her touch your legs. She also said strange things about miracles." Julian felt a cold edge in Eleanor's voice, something more than just anger. "Ms. Reed, please come inside. We can talk more comfortably." Eleanor hesitated, looking into the house. She had heard rumors about this castle, about the wealthy, solitary man inside. But she also saw the sincerity in Julian's eyes, a look devoid of condescension and full of despair. She nodded, stepping inside. "Forgive me," she said. "It's just, I'm used to worrying about her." Julian led her into the living room, where a fireplace was burning, creating a cozy atmosphere. I understand. I talked to Clara. She's very special. I know. Clara always sees the good in people. Eleanor said, her voice softening. But I can't let her come to a stranger's house, especially a man like you. Julian felt a knife twist in his heart. He knew what Eleanor meant. A rich, single, paralyzed man. He knew what those thoughts would be. You don't need to worry about me, Ms. Reed. I would never harm her. Eleanor looked directly at him, and then her anger faded, replaced by a look of weariness. I see you, she said. And you see me. We're the same. We both live in a world where no one truly understands. It was a strange moment. Two people seemingly from different worlds found a commonality in their loneliness. If you'll allow it, I'd like to invite Clara back. Her presence. It brought me something I had long forgotten. Eleanor was silent. She looked into Julian's eyes and felt his sincerity. She saw no danger, only a deep sadness. I'll let her come, but only if I'm here. I'll do my work in your kitchen. Julian was surprised. What kind of work do you do? I do odd jobs, cleaning houses, organizing documents. I can work while Clara is here. That way I can earn extra money and also supervise her. Julian nodded. It was a perfect solution. That's wonderful. I have a lot of work that needs doing. My documents have been piling up for months. In the days that followed, Julian Vance's life changed unexpectedly. The mansion was no longer a silent castle. Each afternoon, Clara's clear laughter echoed through the halls. She treated the mansion like her own playground, exploring every corner and touching expensive antiques without an ounce of fear. Meanwhile, Eleanor worked quietly. She reorganized Julian's library, cleaned the unused living rooms, and sorted his personal documents. Julian occasionally watched her from afar. She worked with great care and meticulousness, and he could see the resilience and self-respect of a woman who had to shoulder everything on her own. Clara continued her therapy. Today we're going to practice gratitude, she said. You have to think of 3 good things you're thankful for. Julian initially played along, but he gradually realized these things had meaning. 1, Clara's laughter. 2, Ellie's fingers when she organizes the books. 3, the feeling of the sun on my face. One afternoon, while Ellie was cleaning Julian's study, she accidentally knocked over a picture frame. The photo was of a young man with a charming smile and blonde hair. Ellie stared at the picture. A familiar feeling washed over her. Julian, she said, her voice trembling. Is this Ethan? Julian turned his wheelchair. Yes, Ethan Reed, my best friend. Is he your brother? Eleanor nodded, tears starting to stream down her face. He was my brother. I hadn't seen him before the accident. We had an argument. She turned to Julian with a look of agony. And he was gone. I've always blamed myself. Julian felt an electric shock run down his spine. Eleanor was Ethan's sister. That's why her eyes looked so familiar. It wasn't your fault, he said. It was mine. I read the papers. You were driving that night. They said you were speeding, Eleanor said. He's gone and you survived. Julian couldn't respond. The guilt he had buried for 15 years resurfaced. I tried to save him, he said. But I was too late. I know you didn't mean to. But I've always felt a part of me died with him, Eleanor said. And then she ran out of the room. Julian sat alone, feeling the connection that had just been made break apart. He had lost Ethan once again, and now he was in danger of losing both Eleanor and Clara. The conversation about Ethan had created a cold chasm between Julian and Eleanor. Eleanor no longer spoke to Julian with ease. She simply went about her work quietly and seriously avoiding eye contact. Clara remained as innocent as ever, but even she could sense the tension. "Mr. Julian," she asked one afternoon, "are you and my mom mad at each other?" "No," Julian said, feeling a pang of sorrow. "Your mom and I aren't mad. It's just I said something I shouldn't have." Throughout those days, Julian had to confront an old pain: Ethan's accident. The guilt had weighed on him for 15 years, and now with Eleanor's presence, it became even heavier. He knew Eleanor had every right to resent him. He had been the one driving that car, and she had lost her only brother. He once thought money could solve everything. But now he understood that money couldn't buy forgiveness or mend a broken heart. Julian tried to talk to Eleanor, but she always dodged him. One morning, he decided he had to face her directly. He wheeled himself into the kitchen where Eleanor was making breakfast with Clara. "Ellie," he said, "we need to talk." Eleanor sighed softly but turned to face him. "What is it, Julian? About Ethan? What happened that night? I'm sorry, I never meant to hurt him." "I know," Eleanor said, her voice filled with weariness. "But the fact remains. He's gone and you're alive. I don't blame you, Julian. I just feel so much pain whenever I think of him." Julian felt a flicker of hope. She didn't blame him. "I know that feeling," he said. "I've lived with that guilt for 15 years too. But maybe we can forgive each other and move forward together. I've found something in this life, a reason to live, and I don't want to lose it." Eleanor looked at him, at the despair in his eyes. For the first time in days, she saw a Julian who was no longer cold, but a man who was hurting and sincere. I'll think about it," she said. "Now I have to take Clara to school." When Julian returned to his study, he saw Mrs. Haynes holding a tabloid, her face full of concern. "Mr. Vance, there's an article about you." Julian took the newspaper. The front page featured a candid photo of him and Clara in the conservatory, with Clara on his lap and him smiling. "Crippled billionaire seduced by gold-digging woman and daughter." The sensational headline screamed, "Stockholm Syndrome or Masterful Deception. Ex-wife Genevieve Vance prepares to sue to protect her ex-husband's assets." Julian felt a surge of anger. Genevieve had made her move. She didn't just want his money, she wanted to destroy the new life he was trying to build. She had always been jealous of anything that made him happy. And now she was using it against him. At that moment, the phone rang. It was his lawyer, David Sterling. "Julian." David's voice was grim. "I just got a notification from Genevieve's lawyer. She's suing you for diminished mental capacity due to manipulation and wants to void the old divorce settlement. She's asking for half your assets." "What does she want?" Julian asked. "She already has enough money." "She doesn't just want money, Julian. She wants to ruin you. She's hired a psychologist and a private investigator. She's collecting every piece of evidence she can to smear you and Ellie. You need to prepare for a long legal battle." Julian hung up, a cold fear settling in. He could handle Genevieve and the lawyers, but what about Ellie and Clara? He had dragged them into a fight they never wanted. He wondered if Ellie would believe what the newspaper wrote. Would she be scared and leave? That afternoon, when Eleanor and Clara returned, the atmosphere in the house was heavier than ever. Eleanor had seen the newspaper. She was silent, not saying a word. Clara, with the sensitivity of a child, ran to hug Julian. "Don't be sad, Mr. Julian. The newspaper is lying." Eleanor looked into Julian's eyes. "You don't need to apologize, Julian. I'm used to this kind of thing. But I'm worried about Clara." She's too young to understand. Julian felt a wave of relief. Eleanor hadn't left. She was still by his side. "We'll get through this," he said. "I won't let anyone harm you or your daughter." "You're right," Eleanor said, and for the first time Julian felt that she trusted him completely. "But maybe I need to talk to Genevieve. There's something I need to clear up." Julian looked at her, feeling a deep sense of admiration. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to face her. I'll show her that we're not what she thinks, and that love can't be faked." Julian knew the legal battle had just begun, but now he wasn't fighting alone. He had Eleanor and Clara. And something in his chest, a warm and strong feeling, told him they wouldn't lose. Genevieve's legal storm and the tabloid headlines became a dark cloud hanging over the Vance mansion. But despite the tension, life inside continued in a peculiar way. Clara remained a beacon of joy and optimism. She was completely unaffected by the bitter words. To Clara, life was simply a series of moments of love and trust. "Today we're going to practice courage," Clara announced seriously, placing a chocolate chip cookie on Julian's desk. "You have to think of something you're afraid of. Then eat this cookie and promise you won't be afraid of it anymore." Julian ate the cookie and made the promise. He was afraid of losing Eleanor and Clara. He was afraid of facing a battle he didn't know if he could win. He was afraid that everything he was building would fall apart. But then, a miracle happened. One afternoon, as Julian sat in his study trying to focus on the legal documents, he felt a strange sensation. A faint but unmistakable tingle ran down his right leg. He sat motionless, holding his breath. It had been 15 years since he had felt anything there other than emptiness. He waited, and then it came again. A warmth spread like a small electrical current running through the disconnected neural pathways. He felt his heart pound. "Eleanor." He called, his voice trembling with both fear and hope. Eleanor walked in, a stack of documents still in her hands. "What is it, Julian? Are you okay?" I felt something in my leg," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I felt it." Eleanor's eyes widened in astonishment. "Are you sure?" "I think so. A tingle, then a warm feeling." Just then Clara ran into the room, her cheeks flushed from playing outside. "Mr. Julian, I saw you from the window. You looked different, like you were glowing." Julian and Eleanor looked at each other. Had the girl sensed something? "I did feel something, Clara," Julian said carefully. "In my leg, just like you said." Clara's face lit up with the most radiant smile Julian and Eleanor had ever seen. I told you your heart was getting better." She rushed into Julian's arms, and in that moment of pure joy and connection, Julian felt it again, stronger than before. A warm, distinct sensation ran down his right leg. "It's happening," he whispered. "It's actually happening." A few days later, Julian had an appointment with his private doctor, Dr. Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was a brilliant neurologist, but she had always maintained a cold distance from Julian. She still believed Julian was responsible for her brother Ethan's death 15 years ago. As Julian sat in his wheelchair in Evelyn's office, he felt a tension in the air. "Julian," Evelyn set her eyes on the computer screen. "You requested an emergency appointment because you say you've regained sensation in your legs. You know this is medically impossible." "I know what I feel, Evelyn," Julian said. "A tingle, a warm feeling. And this morning, I moved my toe." Evelyn said nothing. She began to examine Julian using professional medical tools. She checked his reflexes, his sensation, and asked him to try to wiggle his toes. Julian tried, and miraculously, his right big toe moved slightly. It was a very small movement, but it was clear and unmistakable. Evelyn stared at Julian's feet. She had treated him for 15 years. She knew everything about his injury, and she had declared it incurable. But the evidence before her said otherwise. "Something is happening," she finally admitted. "I can't explain it medically, but there are significant changes in your neurological responses." She turned to look at Julian, her eyes full of surprise and a hint of confusion. "Julian, I always believed you were a selfish and irresponsible person. But the man sitting in front of me now, you're not the person I knew 15 years ago." Julian smiled. "That's because a 6-year-old girl taught me how to love again, and a brave woman gave me a reason to live." Evelyn nodded. She could see the change. 15 years ago, Julian was a broken man. Now, he was a man with hope. "Julian," she said seriously, "I don't believe in miracles, but I believe in evidence. I'll run a few more tests. But if what I'm seeing is right, you might be able to walk again." Julian felt an electric shock run through his body. He had heard those words so many times, but this time was different. It came from a woman who had witnessed his pain for 15 years. "The outside world won't believe it," Evelyn said. "Genevieve will use this against you. She'll say you're delusional, that it's a staged act. But Julian, I believe you, and I will help you prove it." Julian felt a deep sense of relief. Finally, another woman believed him, one who had lived with the pain of losing her brother. He knew he had an ally, and perhaps this was the moment to tell Evelyn about Eleanor and Clara, about the real miracle that had happened in his life. News of Julian's neurological recovery, though not yet public, created a wave of hope and anxiety within him. After leaving Evelyn's office, he went to Eleanor and Clara. He told them everything, not hiding a single detail. He didn't want them to leave him out of fear. He wanted them to be part of this victory. Eleanor listened to Julian's story with surprise and a deep happiness. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not from fear, but from emotion. She had once been skeptical, had kept a cold distance, but now she fully believed in the miracle Clara had spoken of. She knew that miracle didn't come from a supernatural force, but from Julian's own heart, from the change she had witnessed. "Julian," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I never thought this could happen. But I believe you, and I won't let anyone take this hope away from us." Clara was overjoyed. "I told you miracles are real," she exclaimed, hugging both Julian and Eleanor. Your legs woke up. In the days that followed, the bond between Julian and Eleanor deepened. They no longer felt awkward or distant. They had become a team, a family facing the storm ahead. Their love wasn't just romantic. It was a bond of understanding, respect, and connection between two people who had once been broken. Julian, with the support of his lawyer, David Sterling, prepared for a tough legal battle. David warned Julian that Genevieve's lawyer was brilliant and would use every trick to smear him and Ellie. "They will exploit Ethan's accident, Julian," David said. "They'll use it to prove that you have an irresponsible and easily manipulated nature." Julian was mentally prepared for that. He had spent 15 years living with the torment. Now was the time to face it. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed with reporters and onlookers. Genevieve walked in dressed lavishly and with a haughty air. Her face was full of contempt when she saw Julian, Eleanor, and Clara. She sat down, a smirk on her face. Genevieve's lawyer, a middle-aged man with silver hair, started by attacking Eleanor. "Mrs. Eleanor Reed," he said, "you're a single mother who works odd jobs. You moved in with Julian Vance, a disabled billionaire, after your daughter knocked on his door for food. Are you not exploiting Mr. Vance's loneliness and health condition for personal gain? Eleanor replied with surprising composure. "We are not exploiting Julian Vance. We love him, and he has given us a safe place to live." "So the fact that your daughter, a 6-year-old, claimed she could heal Julian Vance is not a staged act to manipulate him?" the lawyer asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Eleanor looked him straight in the eye. "No. That's the miracle of faith. She believed in Julian, and the miracle happened." Next, Genevieve's lawyer called Genevieve to the stand. She told a painted-up story speaking of Julian's loneliness after the accident, his despair and fits of rage. She concluded by saying that Julian was not mentally fit to manage his assets, and that he was being subtly manipulated by Eleanor Reed. When it was Julian's turn, he took the stand himself. He didn't use his lawyer to speak for him. He told the story of his life about the accident, Ethan's death, and the pain that had consumed him for 15 years. He spoke of the guilt that had haunted him and the loneliness that had turned him into a cold person. "I was a monster, a man who had died inside," Julian said. "I had lost everything, and I thought I would never find happiness again." He turned to look at Genevieve. "She's right about one thing. I have changed. But that change wasn't manipulation. It was thanks to a 6-year-old girl who knocked on my door and taught me how to love again. It was thanks to a brave woman who gave me a reason to live." Julian looked directly at Eleanor. "You didn't deceive me, Ellie. You saved me. You and Clara gave me something that money can't buy. That's love." When Julian finished, the courtroom was silent. Everyone was moved by his sincerity. Even the judge couldn't hide his surprise. Genevieve's lawyer tried to counter, but his words no longer carried any weight. Julian had won a moral victory. But the battle was not yet over. After Julian's emotional testimony, the court took a recess. Although Julian had won the sympathy of everyone, Genevieve's lawyer was not giving up. He still believed he could find material evidence against Julian. "Emotions are not evidence," he said coldly. Julian sat in his wheelchair, feeling exhausted, but also full of hope. He had revealed everything he had hidden for 15 years. He had faced his greatest fear, and he had done it with Eleanor and Clara by his side. When the trial resumed, Genevieve's lawyer requested a final cross-examination. He had prepared a video taken from the security camera of a nearby grocery store. The video showed Eleanor Reed talking to a stranger. "This is proof that Mrs. Reed had contact with people who could help her carry out this fraudulent plan," he declared. But just then, something unexpected happened. Dr. Evelyn Reed, Julian's cold and distant doctor, walked into the courtroom. She was dressed formally and held a folder of documents in her hand. "Your Honor," she said, "I am Dr. Evelyn Reed, Julian Vance's neurologist. I request to be heard as a witness." Genevieve's lawyer vehemently objected. "Your Honor, Ms. Reed is Mr. Vance's doctor. Her testimony cannot be objective." "I will not speak about my patient's medical condition," Evelyn said calmly. "I will speak about the past." Evelyn began to tell the story of her brother Ethan. She spoke of the pain of losing him and how she had resented Julian. "For 15 years, I believed Julian was responsible for my brother's death. I maintained a cold distance from him and never truly trusted him." The entire courtroom was silent. Genevieve looked at Evelyn with suspicion. "But recently," Evelyn continued, "I found an old diary of my brother's. In it, he wrote about the accident." She held up the diary. Ethan wrote that he tried to grab the steering wheel from Julian. He had been drinking that night and lost control. He wrote that Julian tried to save him, but it was too late. The truth was revealed. Julian hadn't been speeding. He hadn't been irresponsible. He had simply tried to save his friend, but failed. He had lived with that guilt unfairly for 15 years. Evelyn looked directly at Julian, tears streaming down her face. Julian, she said, I was wrong. You weren't irresponsible. You were a hero. And I am sorry for not believing you. Julian felt a mix of pain and relief. The pain of 15 years of injustice and the relief of finally being vindicated. He couldn't control his emotions. Tears rolled down his face. Then Evelyn presented one more piece of evidence. Your Honor, I have conducted a new test on Julian Vance, and the results show a remarkable regeneration of nerve cells in his spinal cord. This is medically unexplainable, but it's happening. And I believe it's happening not because of any treatment, but because of the faith and love of a little girl who gave him a reason to live. The courtroom erupted in gasps. The judge banged his gavel. I dismiss Mrs. Genevieve Vance's lawsuit. The court finds no evidence that Julian Vance has diminished mental capacity or was manipulated. On the contrary, we find evidence that Julian Vance is a man who has found himself again. Genevieve sat there, her face white with anger and defeat. Her plan had collapsed. Julian turned to look at Eleanor and then at Evelyn. The three of them had weathered a storm together, and they had done it. A few weeks after the trial, the Vance mansion returned to a state of peace. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear, hope-filled atmosphere. Julian had been officially vindicated, and Genevieve had suffered a humiliating defeat. Now nothing could stop Julian and Eleanor from being together. But more importantly, the real miracle was still in progress. Julian had begun a rigorous physical therapy regimen. He had a team of the best doctors and physical therapists recommended by Evelyn herself. They worked with him every day, helping him to regain strength in the legs that had been immobile for 15 years. One morning, Julian sat in his wheelchair in the gym, staring at his legs. They were no longer as lifeless as before. He could feel something every time he touched them, a very faint but clear sensation. He could now wiggle his toes, something he thought was impossible 15 years ago. Eleanor walked into the room holding a glass of orange juice. Julian, she said, her voice full of love. You're doing great. The doctor says you've made incredible progress. Julian looked at her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Eleanor and Clara had given him a reason to live, a reason to fight. Clara ran in cheering. Mr. Julian, you have to stand up. I drew a picture of you standing on your own 2 feet. Julian smiled. He looked into Clara's innocent eyes, the eyes that had never doubted his ability. I'll try, Clara. He placed his hands on the parallel bars, took a deep breath. The doctors and Eleanor stood around him, all silent and anxious. Julian began to push. His legs, though still shaky, responded. He could feel the strength returning, a very faint but distinct sensation. Inch by inch, Julian stood up. It wasn't easy. His whole body ached, but he didn't stop. He stood tall. For the first time in 15 years, he was on his own 2 feet. Eleanor and the doctors erupted in joy. Julian, you did it! Eleanor cheered, tears streaming down her face. Clara just smiled as if she had known this would happen all along. I told you, she said. Miracles are real. Julian looked at Eleanor, then at Clara. He had done it not just for himself, but for them. Now, I'm going to walk, Julian said. I'm going to walk over to Ellie and Clara. He slowly took his first step, then another. The first steps were wobbly, but he didn't fall. He walked, his eyes fixed on Eleanor and Clara. His life, after 15 years in darkness, finally had light. Julian walked to Eleanor and Clara, and he embraced them. I did it, he whispered. I can walk. Clara whispered in his ear, the miracle wasn't that you could walk. The miracle was that you found yourself again. And Julian knew Clara was right. In the weeks that followed, Julian's life changed not just physically, but mentally as well. He could walk, even run, and he cherished every moment of it. Every morning he and Clara would walk in the garden, discussing the trees and flowers. Julian could carry Clara in his arms, something he had dreamed of for years. The laughter of Clara and Eleanor filled every corner of the mansion. The lonely castle had become a home. One afternoon, as Julian and Eleanor sat together in the library, he decided to express everything in his heart. "Eleanor," he said, his voice full of emotion, "I was once a broken man. I lived in darkness with guilt and loneliness. But you and Clara brought light back into my life. You gave me a reason to live, a reason to fight. And I love you." Eleanor looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too, Julian. I have loved you since the day I saw the loneliness in your eyes." Julian knelt down awkwardly, but sincerely. He took out a small red velvet box. "Eleanor Reed, will you marry me?" Eleanor nodded without hesitation. "Yes," she said. "I will marry you." They shared a passionate kiss, a kiss of love, forgiveness, and hope. Clara ran in, and seeing the scene, she cheered. "I told you miracles are real." The next day, Julian went to see Evelyn. Evelyn had always kept a distance from him even after he was vindicated. Julian knew she was still haunted by Ethan's death. "Evelyn," Julian said, "I didn't come here to gloat. I came here to apologize." "Julian," Evelyn said, "you don't have to apologize. You were vindicated. It wasn't your fault." "You're wrong, Evelyn," Julian said. "It was my fault. I didn't tell you about Ethan's diary. I kept it a secret, and I let you live with that resentment for years." Julian had lied, but he had done it to spare Evelyn further pain. Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time she saw the sincerity in his eyes. She forgave him. "Julian," she said, "we were both victims of that accident. But now we have been healed, and we can do something to help others." Julian and Evelyn founded the Clara Foundation, a nonprofit organization, to research neural regeneration and help people in situations similar to Julian's. They used his wealth to build a state-of-the-art research center and invited the best experts to work there. Julian also went to see Genevieve. She was sitting alone, her face full of defeat. "Julian Chun," she said, "you won. You have everything." "Genevieve, down," Julian said. "I didn't come here to celebrate a victory. I came here to say goodbye. I forgive you. I hope you can also find happiness in your life." Julian left without any regrets. He was no longer the man of the past. He had found himself again, and he had found true love. 6 months later, the Vance mansion was splendidly decorated for a momentous occasion. It wasn't a lavish party for Julian to show off his recovery, but a cozy, loving wedding. Julian Vance, in an elegant black suit, stood waiting at the end of the small chapel on the estate grounds. He was no longer in his wheelchair. He stood on his own 2 feet, steady and full of life. Next to him was Clara, the 6-year-old girl, in a pristine white dress, ready to be a flower girl. She held a small basket of flowers, and on her radiant face was the happiest smile Julian had ever seen. Julian's mother, Diana Vance, sat in the front row. She was no longer a cold, elegant lady. She had become a loving grandmother who visited Ellie and Clara often. She had witnessed Julian's change, and she was grateful to Ellie and Clara for bringing her son back to her. As the wedding march played, everyone turned. Eleanor Reed walked in her arm, linked with Julian's father. Her wedding dress was simple, yet exquisite, highlighting her mature and resilient beauty. She walked down the aisle, her eyes fixed solely on Julian. As she drew near, Julian felt his heart want to leap out of his chest. He had once been a broken man, living in darkness. But now he had found the light of his life. The wedding took place in a solemn and emotional atmosphere. Julian and Eleanor exchanged their vows. They promised to love, respect, and be with each other for the rest of their lives. Afterward, Julian gave a short but emotional speech. "I once thought the miracle was that I could walk," he said. "But I was wrong. The miracle isn't my legs. The miracle is Ellie and Clara. The miracle is that I found a family, a reason to live, a reason to love. Ellie, you saved me. You and Clara gave me a new life. I love you both so much." Julian and Eleanor's wedding became a true fairy tale. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a testament to love and forgiveness. Julian and Eleanor lived a happy and fulfilling life. They raised Clara together, and they managed the Clara Foundation, helping people in situations similar to Julian's. And in the years that followed, Julian and Eleanor had 2 more children. Their house was never without laughter, and their love story became an inspiration to everyone. The story had ended, but a new chapter had begun. The story of Julian Vance, a man who found himself again, found love, and found a family, all thanks to a 6-year-old girl who knocked on his door and taught him about miracles.